guys. Hello, it's me. I'm back. It's Brandy. Welcome to Health.Beauty.Hope. Guys, I know we just did a show like less than 24 hours ago. It went really, really, really well, and everybody is so excited about what's going on. It's so informative. People are getting a lot of information, and I am back this Sunday to speak with someone that I had on the show previously. Amazing, 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 amazing woman. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we spoke about before, but just a little bit more depth. We're going to be discussing mental clutter with Leslie Gaudet. So let me just go ahead and bring Leslie on. Give me one moment here. Hi, Leslie.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on again. It's really my pleasure to be here.
We love it. We love it. We love it. We loved your last show. It was really good. So much good information. And it's good to hear from someone who's so positive and can offer so much, to our listeners, especially about, just kind of getting themselves together. And I know a lot of people gave me a lot of good feedback about the blog and just, taking a look at themselves and loving themselves and self-acceptance. So thank you for that. Today, we are going to be talking a little bit more. You had mentioned in the previous broadcast about mental clutter. So before we get into that, in case you guys didn't hear the last show, Leslie, just tell us a little bit more about yourself, like what it is that you do exactly.
Yeah, okay, so I'm an empowerment coach. I mostly work with women, but it doesn't mean that the guys aren't welcome. I'm always here for them as well. But what I like to do is I help my clients get a handle on mental clutter. So, your life's daily chaotic events, things that start fogging up the brain, and how to process that, giving them the tools to help them get through that on a daily basis. So then that kind of frees them up to do other things. So like they might have dreams or aspirations for their lives, and they want to be able to turn those visions for their lives into the realities. In order for them to do that, they need to be able to handle everything that's happening right now so that they can actually feel free enough to look forward, to actually look at where they're at now and, think about what do I need to do to move me forward.
Perfect. Okay, so you brought up mental clutter. So elaborate a little bit more on exactly what is mental clutter. Like, what exactly is that?
Okay, so pretty much mental clutter is, so you have your life. So I'll give you an example. As an example, for a woman who's married, she's got a really stressful job, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. She has maybe young kids, and, nowadays kids have a lot of activities, not always the same, so she's going from place to place with that. Having to deal with everything at work, so it all piles up, information overload, trying to figure out how to finish each project and do it well as then be a good mom and a wife. Going home, you have your activities, your after-school activities, you've got to make dinner, you've got homework, then you've got to get them bathed and then ready to go to bed, and then you've got to spend time with your significant other, and then you have to, if you can, find time for yourself just to kind of unwind and then go to sleep and do it all over again the next day. And so that's you're building up a lot of mental clutter because you're taking a lot of stuff in every single day, your own worries, your hopes, your dreams, plus whoever else is in your life, and you're taking all of that in. And so that can really fog up your brain, making you feel like you're totally overwhelmed and you can't deal. And so what do you do with all of that? And on top of that, you could be actually thinking, okay, I want more for my life. I know there's more to life than what I'm doing now, and I want to make changes. But right now, I'm so in it that I can't even think straight. So what can I do in order to be able to deal with all of the things that are going on, swirling around in my brain? What can I do with all of that so that I can use what I can't need to use, and then get rid of the stuff that I don't, and I'm opening myself up for more things to come in because I found a way to deal with everything, what I'm dealing with today. So I've dealt with today, and now tomorrow comes, and now I've got the same tools that I use, the same practices to help me with tomorrow and the day after and so forth. So again, you're dealing with mental clutter. You're getting a handle on it. You're taking control, basically. You're taking back control of your mental headspace, so that you can actually free yourself up to do other things. So that's
So
kind of like what mental clutter is.
So in terms of that, so in terms of what it is, do you think like there are people who are really able to just like they are able to multitask, they're able to do so many different things, it doesn't really bother them? Do you think there's a person that's more particularly prone to mental clutter as to someone else, and what does that person look like? Who is someone that's more likely to have this happen to them, where they just get so overwhelmed that they really can't declutter their thoughts? Is that something that's more likely to happen to a certain kind of person, or is it something that you think we all go through or we all deal with?
So I have this thing about multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
So multitasking really isn't a great thing. As much as people like to say, oh, I'm a multitasker, oh, I can do several things at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can maybe do several things at one time, but are you doing all of those things well? So multitasking, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing everything well to the best of your ability, to the best that you would want each thing to be done. So I always feel like with multitasking, you're not always really helping yourself. You could be hurting yourself as far as, you know, the quality of what you're trying to achieve for each task that you're doing. So you might think that, oh, I can do this and I can do that all at the same time, but you know, by multitasking, you risk having to go back to clean up errors that you might have made, you know, to tweak things maybe that didn't work. Instead of taking the time to do one thing at a time, do it well, complete it, and then on to the next thing. And so that you don't have to actually be looking over your shoulder, did I do it right? Did I finish it to the best of my ability? So multitasking, although people tend to quote that as a badge of honor a lot of times, it's not necessarily what I would think is a badge of honor if you have to go back several times to fix things and make them a little bit better because you actually had a vision, but you didn't really meet that vision. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly. I understand completely.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and so I found for me, that's what I've done, is that I've realized that by not multitasking and just doing one thing at a time and doing it well, I've had better results on the things that I've done because I've taken the time to really focus on one thing at a time and doing it well, so that I can know in my heart, you know, that I did it to the best of my ability. This is the product that I want to put out. It's exactly what I had envisioned, and now I can move on to the next thing.
And how do we identify that this is becoming, like, mental clutter is becoming a problem with us? I mean, you can seem like, you know, one day it seems like you have everything together, you're situated, you have your planner, you have your schedule, but then what are some identifying signs that you're really suffering from this? This is becoming a problem for you?
Well, that's a really good question. So I've asked, I had some friends of mine, some really good people. I'm not going to say names, but I've done a survey, and I actually asked some people, you know, what do they think when I say mental clutter? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people were coming up with were saying frustrated, can't think clearly, irritated. Another person was saying, I think of anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, thoughts swirling, hard to focus on the task at hand. One more was saying that, you know, it leads to something negative in her life. For example, stress can be a trigger for overeating. Mm-hmm. And then another person said, I think of too many things on my mind at once, or something that is worrying me that I have no control over, worrying about pleasing everyone. So I got different answers, and I'm still getting some surveys coming in as we speak. But that's kind of like what I wanted to find out, what people thought of when I asked them, what do you think of mental clutter? And a lot of it you can see is just people are coming back saying it's, you know, they're anxious, frustrated, irritated. You know, it's just those types of feelings. And so for me, mental clutter definitely is really about a lot going on in your life that makes you feel like you're frustrated, that you can't think clearly. And part of that is what I called the word trigger. I know has a little bit of a very sensitive spot for some people.
Yes.
Triggers actually could be like trauma reminders. I got that from someone yesterday. I was at an event, and they told me about, instead of saying the word trigger, for some people, it's easier to listen to the terminology of trauma reminder. And that could be like, say, for example, anniversary dates of loss, of someone you've lost, someone very near and dear to you, or a traumatic event, a frightening thing that happened in your community. You might have friction in your family, or maybe you've ended a relationship recently. You might be suffering from financial problems, or maybe you're isolating yourself because you're spending too much time alone. And so those types of triggers then can then result in feelings of, for example, like shame. You might feel unworthy, angry, anxious, fearful. You might feel guilt of some sort. I mean, it just. And when I was hearing frustration, like people were saying they were frustrated and they can't think clearly because they were irritated through mental clutter, it's because you've got a lot going on in our lives. Right. And I know a lot of that I took from my own personal background, that I realized that for me, I needed tools to help me get through my mental clutter, being able to manage what I'm taking in and have an outlet for it. And that's why, and I don't know if I've said this before on your show, but I've said it a lot of times when I do my Facebook Lives, is there's power in the mind dump. And if you want me to explain that, I can.
Yes, absolutely. Explain that.
Okay. So this comes to like mental triggers with mental clutter. So the power of the mind dump is basically a concept where you have it, whether you use it through journaling. I would say it's through journaling, is getting it out. So you write down everything that's in your head, like whatever it is. It can be random stuff. It could be bullet points. What you're thinking about right now, what your life is, what's happening to you right now, what happened to you today. All of these things are going through your head. And in that could be some really great stuff like, oh, I had an idea to do this today, but it's lumped in with, oh, this guy cut me off in traffic today and it made me feel like this. And you just go through everything, not only with dumping everything that's in your mind, you make sure that you're associating your feelings with what you're putting down on paper, so that when you go through all of what you've put down on paper, you're able then to discern, okay, this is really great stuff. I can revisit this. How can I make this work in my life right now? And then this is stuff this is how I felt today from negative things that happened in my life. And then you figure, do I hold on to this? Does it serve me? How do I just go through it, look at it, revisit it, think, okay, this doesn't serve me. Why am I holding on to it? You release it, and then you just go back through the things that really serve you, and you're able to have these really great things that you can start using for your life, whether it's ideas, whether it's celebrating your wins, for example. Great things happened to you today. You could have had, like for me, a win today is being on your podcast. So I'll be journaling today. Cool. At the end of my day is I got to be on this really great podcast, talking to people about mental clutter. So for me, this is a win. So that's what I'm saying. You have all of these great things. You've got all of this good stuff up here, but then you've got all of this other negative stuff that starts to fog up your brain. And if you carry that with you to the next day, number one, you're going to probably forget a lot of the good stuff. Because I know I've worked with people there. I said, well, why don't you, from the time we started working together till today, why don't you start writing down everything of where you used to be and where you are at today? And they blow themselves away when they write it down and they look at it and they go, wow, I didn't even realize that I had all of this great stuff happen to me. Why? Because we're taking in so much more things, and a lot of it is negative, that it seems to push down a lot of the positive things.
Right.
So, I mean, with mental clutter, that's what it does. And so I feel like the reason why I picked the wording of mental clutter is that I feel it's just everything that you take in, every bit of information that you take in, whether it's social media, whether it's talking with somebody, whether it's interactions, whatever is going on, it's all going in your brain, regardless of whether you're speaking it or you're visualizing it, you're seeing it in front of you, but it's all being stored up here. And if you can find a way to get it out on paper, basically the mind dump, there's so much power in that, because then it's like you feel freed from all of that stuff, so that you can start tomorrow and doing whatever else, going on with your life.
Wow. Would you say that is a way to resolve the mental clutter? Are there other ways that you can resolve it aside from, journaling? Is there anything else that we can do to really resolve that?
Well, of course, because, you can write everything down, but then there's the work of looking at what works for you. So for example, let me just take it to a different place. So I like to talk about triggers a lot, and the things that happen in our life. And what comes from triggers, what the triggers do is no pun intended, they trigger our feelings, okay? So then our feelings trigger our reactions and our responses to what we were triggered by in the first place. And where does that take us? And so first of all, taking the mind dump portion of it and getting everything out on paper is part of it. But then some of the things that you might write down are things that have been kind of following you around for quite some time. Take a look at what you're writing down, because it actually could be thoughts and feelings from something that you were triggered by that took you right back to a place, like, for example, an anniversary date of losing someone that was very close to you. And you're reacting and responding exactly like you always have. And this could have been going on for years. So, for example, say something happens to you, you end a relationship with someone, and it might have been very traumatic for you, ending that relationship, and that happened, say, a couple years ago. But now you're in a new relationship, and that person might even say something similar that other person in your life might have said to you, and brought you right back to that moment of, that fight before you guys broke up, right?
I'm literally notorious for that. Like, I can literally sabotage a relationship because if someone will say something that will remind me of my, an ex, and it's so sad because it's not intentional, but it does do that to me for some reason.
Right. And so, and it's natural because you're vulnerable. Like, our hearts are vulnerable, and we give them freely, but it's hard when they get broken. And so that feeling comes back up, right? And then you maybe start feeling shame. Why am I letting myself get here again? You might feel inadequate. Am I worth being in the relationship maybe that I'm in now? And so then you either fight or you leave. So you might say, okay, I'm done. And you end up breaking up this new relationship, like you were saying. Or you might blame shift. So, and that's just normal. It's unfortunate, but it's the hardest lessons seem to stick with us. And it's hard because I think our relationships in particular, that women, because we are so emotional, emotion has to be in the way when we have a physical connection with someone, the emotions are usually part of it. And so when we feel there's the loss of trust or something there, we actually can bring ourselves back to a previous relationship that has nothing to do with the current relationship, but we start shifting the blame of that all men are exactly the same as what you experienced before, without, separating that this is a new relationship, this person isn't that person, this relationship isn't that relationship. So it's like learning how to, so again, coming back to that, your reactions could be that where you end the relationship, you're blame shifting and all of that.
Yes.
But and so you then, once the feelings dissipate and life goes on, because that's what happens, time never doesn't stop and things go on. If you don't deal with that, you're going to repeat the same pattern. So you'll get triggered again and down the same road, same feelings, same reactions, and it's just triggers, feelings, reactions, triggers, feelings, reactions. And you actually don't realize what you're doing, because at that point you're in it and you haven't learned that there's things that you can do. Because really, the road that we decide to take will determine how we're going to come out of, out of breaking this cycle and changing our patterns of how we react with our things like this, and specifically. So that's what I was talking about, triggers. But bringing it back to mental clutter, it's kind of the same thing, because this ties into mental clutter. Things that are going on in our lives sometimes are intertwined with past things that have happened to us, and our mental clutter will see things that remind us, or hear things that remind us, or do things that remind us of something, and it's not always a positive reminder. And so we tend to, all of this stuff builds up in our head, are based around that, for one thing, and then everything else in life, whether it's your job, your family, your home life, all of that stuff, all compounded into this huge thing. And if you don't find a way to get it out, you know how people say, I'm about to explode,
yes.
That type of thing, or I'm at when you put your hand over your head, I'm right here right now, I'm just here ready to explode. Yeah. Well, that's because you haven't learned to figure out how to empty it out. And that's why I feel like the power of the mind up is so powerful, because it helps you get that out of your head, so that you can then really look at what am I doing with my life? Why am I continuously going down this road? And why am I still following the same pattern over and over again? It helps you become self-aware. And that's really key, is becoming self-aware of what you do. You have to really be self-aware. Of what's going on in your world, and then you have to be self-aware of how you react when you're triggered by something that brings you back to whatever moment in time. And it could even be, for example, I'll give you another example. You work in a job, and you've got a really high-stress job, and maybe you grew up in a home where your parents are very strict, and maybe your boss says something to you that brings you right back to the moment of how your parents were when you do something.
Yeah.
And so now you're taking it so personally. And for me, I've always looked at my job, any job that I've ever had, any corporate job, I've always looked at it as being, when someone is giving me critique on the job that I'm doing, it's not critique on Leslie, it's a critique on the job, helping me to do a better job at what I'm currently employed to do. So it has nothing to do with my character, nothing to do with the type of person that I am. It has nothing to do with anything about me other than the job I was hired to do. And so, but people will bring themselves back to a moment where they felt on the outside judged, criticized, put down, and bring that into the workspace, because someone in their workspace is saying, the way you did this really wasn't to the performance level that I expected. And so they take it so personally.
They internalize
and it's
it.
not meant to be that way. Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, mental clutter is really a huge thing, and it can be, there's so many facets to it.
Yes,
I'm learning over time. And it's different for everyone. It's not going to be the same. It's not like a cookie cutter. It's the same for everyone. Becoming self-aware of how to manage your triggers, because it will look different for every single person. No matter, even if you're two moms, so two different families, two women who are married, who have kids, who have a busy corporate life, who have a busy home life. One might have this different dynamic, and one might have this different dynamic, and it's how do they deal with it within their world. It just depends on where they are at in their own lives. So you can't say that two people are alike, because you might be similar in some of the things, but also how you process things is going to be completely different than the other person. So learning to become self-aware and learning how to spot your triggers, and then learning how to manage your feelings based around your triggers, so that when your reactions and responses come into play, you're aware of that, and you decide how to get yourself out of that same pattern, you can break that pattern instead of bringing yourself back to what mentally triggered you in the first place. And so with mental clutter, again, dumping it all onto paper allows you to see the good things, that your wins and all of that great stuff, but then all of the other stuff that you're carrying around, and you can look at that and say, you know what, this has come up for me a lot. How do I deal with this? It makes self-awareness will come around, especially when you can see it in black and white in front of you. Mm-hmm. It's very powerful to do, because then you're able to say, okay, this has come up for me a lot. Why is this coming up for me this much? Why am I feeling this way? And then you can take it a step further and think back and really think about your life and where where you came from and why this is happening to you now, and maybe think of things that remind you of what could have brought you to this place. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do, and it's not just as easy as it sounds.
Right. So in terms of, you seem to, really, you said you're constantly figuring things out with it, and you're obviously very skilled in identifying it. So if our listeners, want to, sit with you and work on this, what could they expect in that process as far as working on this with you? What does that look like?
Well, they definitely would. First of all, it's like basically needing to learn who they are, where they came from. Mm-hmm. So, I'd be asking them a series of questions like, what was your upbringing? Like where were you born? Like, where were you born? Where were you raised? Did you have brothers and sisters? Did you live in a home where it was two parents, or was it just one parent? Were you the youngest? Were you the oldest? Were you the middle child? All of those things really do play a real piece of your puzzle, because it really shows who you are, like where you've realized that you actually stand when it comes to like the positioning. So I kind of liken it to the Olympics. So you have first place, second place, and third place, gold, silver, and bronze, right? So you're like, say, three kids. You've got the oldest, you've got the middle child, and you've got the youngest. And so a lot of the time, the oldest is usually the one that's going out and doing things, and parents are like, cheering them on. Then you got the middle child comes along, and they're kind of like, okay, how do I even live up to the older child, because this older child is a high achiever. I kind of can relate to that growing up, because, I have two younger brothers than I am in my specific household where I grew up. And even though I had an older brother and an older sister, my older brother only lived with us for a short time. But then when he was gone, I was really the oldest as far as being consistent with having what I achieved and what my two younger brothers were coming after me. And so my mom would often say, and I know she didn't mean this out of anything bad, but she would say, why can't you be more like your sister? Now that kind of cut me. I could feel it myself, feeling like, oh, you really shouldn't say that, Mom. And I did call her on it a couple of times, because I was thinking, what does that say to those kids, right? What does it say? Oh, you're not going to live up to it. So then you've got the high achieving one who's always doing well in school, who's outgoing and loves to do things. Then you have the middle child, and then you've got the youngest who's kind of floating along thinking, okay, well, what do I do? And then they're the baby. Now, on this end of the spectrum, you've got the mom who's got the baby, and it's the last one, and it's almost like she wants to hang on and not let that one go. So that one is not learning certain skill sets. So then they're growing up trying to figure out their lot in life. So you've got, not that I was in first place and they were in second and third. What I was just saying is that just as kind of like an idea of just to think about. It's just knowing that there was myself, and I was a high achiever, yes, and I was very outgoing. I always had a lot of friends. I was popular in school, and I'm not saying that to be braggy or anything at all. Totally I just knew that was my lifestyle, because I was always, and I've always been like that person. And then I've got my middle brother, who kind of was a little bit he wasn't big like I was, going out and just talking to everybody. He kind of was a little more reserved. And then the youngest one was more about doing that. But then he was also, whatever he did, he could do no wrong because he was mommy's baby. So that's a different thing. So the way you grow up is completely different than, even though you live in the same dynamic, the same household, the way you grow up is different from one another, and you don't realize that. You think, oh, we all grew up the same, but you didn't.
Oh,
because
wow.
you
That's
all
like, I
had
never even thought of that like
places.
that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. You might have a brother and a sister, or maybe it's a brother, just the two of you, a brother or a sister. But you still grew up in the same house, but you grew up differently. Your experience was different from each other's, regardless of whether you grew up in the same household or not, because it's how you process things. And so that takes you into your life. I mean, I'm going a little deeper here, but that takes you into your life, and then how you manage your triggers or your trauma reminders, however you want to put it, because people, I mean, triggers really kind of, if you want to say it, it's kind of like a trauma reminder because it reminds you of something that really wasn't so pleasant.
Yes.
Most of the time, when you talk about triggers, you're not saying, oh, I remember the anniversary date of meeting you for the first time. That's not really considered a trigger. We're talking about things that take you down a path of maybe not the greatest thing. And going a step further from your reactions and your responses, you've got your rewards. So our actions determine whether we go down one of two roads, okay? How we react to the things to the triggers with our feelings, which determine our reactions, our responses, will then determine what reward we get. So what reward system? So either we go down the road to guilt, shame, and regret over how we reacted and we responded to something, or if we are self-aware and we learn those things and we do things, or there's a lot of things that you can do to really build yourself up, and part of that is self-love and self-growth. Then your second road is you take yourself down the road to triumphs and successes. You start celebrating your wins. You start taking back control of your headspace. Those things that used to trigger you from your past won't hold as much power over you at all. And so your feelings won't be the same as how they used to be. So your reactions and your responses won't be the same, and your rewards will take you to the triumphs and successes, and you can actually be present in your life and move forward and go after the things that you want and turn those into your realities, because you're now healthy enough, you've got a healthy mindset, and you've realized this is the road that I want to take. I don't want to be down the road of self-pity. I want to go towards, being encouraged and uplifted, and my self-esteem is amazing. I know what I want with my life. So it's a bigger thing than it. I mean, it sounds really super simple. And the steps,
wow. I don't think so. I think it's a lot of information.
In place.
And I think, I think it's very informative.
The things that I have, the program that I've put together, it really kind of goes into all of the things that you can do, because you've got to really have a strong sense of self. And that's kind of where you get built up. And so working with me is, first of all, getting to know you. And then I would need to know what is something that you're holding on to, something that really keeps you in the back. And so that will help you then to, knowing that this is the one thing, can help me determine, okay, really, what is your trigger? And your trigger could even be fear. Okay, so your trigger could be fear of being alone, fear of not measuring up, because a lot of the time, too, high-achieving kids will have parents who've been really super encouraging, but they're also super judgmental if you don't meet those expectations. So that's the fear of not measuring up. Or maybe you've not learned how to really navigate in relationships because you've been the type of person that you're always looking at the next day and the next day, and you're already planning your future with someone you just recently met, instead of being in the moment and enjoying the relationship and building it daily, and not putting so much pressure on yourself and on the other person to have a healthy relationship. Treat every relationship as it's in a day, not as it's in a lifetime. Because if you put that pressure on you, that puts way too much pressure on what should be, and then you start fighting about the things that you're not. And so just learning, things like that. And that could be the fear of if it doesn't work out, you're thinking you're afraid to be alone. So sometimes you might settle for being with someone who's really not good for you. So you settle on being in a relationship that doesn't work, that it doesn't have your best interests at heart, and you're unhappy. I've had friends in the past who've been married for many, many years, almost 20 years, and then they break up. And that's just because I think a lot of the time it can be maybe just not realizing and thinking about where you guys are at with your lives and being able to kind of work through each issue and say, okay, this is where we were and what we wanted, but now I know things have changed. Are we still in the same wavelength? Can we work through it together? But instead, resentment builds up over the years, and things happen, and then they break up, and it's really sad because, they were in love once before, and now it's no longer a relationship. So it's like there's a lot of different pieces, and it just depends on where you sit in on what's holding you back, because that one thing, whatever it is, like I said, it could be the fear of being alone, it could be the fear of not being enough, it could be the fear of not measuring up, it could be the fear of being judged or criticized. It could be all of these things, and then your feelings and how you react and respond. And this could not only just be in your personal life, but this could be in your professional life too.
Yeah.
So if you want to level up at your job, you want to do really good things at your job, and there's something holding you back, and the way you react to something that happens at work is really not even because of work, but it's being reminded because something happens at work, and how you react and respond is not necessarily the place that you want to be. You want to be able to look at that and say, okay, this isn't because of work. This is because I have an insecurity based around something that happened before to me. And it's in the past. Learning these things in the past, that's where they belong. And so, again, it's a really big topic.
So ultimately, it's just about identifying who you are and knowing who you are, and that's where you should start, because of course you're not going to really know what your trigger is until you find out exactly who. And I guess a lot of people kind of walk this earth with this false sense of who they are because their environment often kind of depicts, like who they think that they are, like their mom or their wife or their CEO, but they're not really identifying with who they are as far as like where they come from.
Sure, because here's another thing. You could grow up in privilege. Say you grew up with privilege, and then when you're out on your own, you don't have that anymore. Well, who are you? You grew up with privilege, and now you're this person out there, no longer surrounded with that security, and now you have to make your own identity based around what you want, where you see your life going, and then now you're thinking, well, was I only good enough during those times? There's a lot of stuff. It really kind of, and you get in your head about it, which is really sad, because you get in your head and you start actually telling yourself things and you start believing it. And so, or you grew up poor. And then, so you take some of those, maybe some of the poor things that you learned, based around, you grew up with a money lack mindset because you grew up poor, and you take that into your world when you're older, and so you're afraid to step out of your comfort zone, afraid to do something new, for the fear of that if I spend money on doing this, something bad is going to happen. I'm not going to be able to pay for it. I used to be in that mindset. I grew up poor, but I've learned that if I don't flip my switch to believe that no matter what, I will have what I need when I need it.
Yes.
And have an abundance mindset. That's what I'm going to draw to me. And that's what I think people they don't realize. So it's really self-awareness, knowing who you are. So that's where it starts, is getting to know you, and then going from there, and then being able to not only getting to know you and helping you identify your triggers so that you can spot your triggers when your feelings start to get involved, so that you can actually have more control over your how you react and respond. And in that way, you can break that pattern of how you've always been going through life.
Right.
And on top of that, you also add in other things to help grow you and build you as a person.
Yes. Well, that is a lot of information, and it's a lot of good information. So thank you for being on and providing all of that information. I
You
think
are
it's
welcome.
just, it kind of definitely goes along with our previous interview with you when you talk about self-acceptance and self-awareness and why it's so important. I think today you definitely identified, more of why it's important to, or not really like why, but just how to identify who you are, because you really can't accept yourself if you don't know who you are. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for all this information. I know the listeners will be excited to hear it. And again, guys, your Facebook, just Leslie Gaudet, right? I'm going to link all of her information in the actual description box so you guys can follow her Facebook. She does lives every morning. They're great. So you guys might want to check those out. And thank you so much again for being on the show. I appreciate you. I look forward to you coming back on again. We always have great conversations on here.
You are welcome.
And you guys definitely, like I said, check out our information and learn more information and, see if you can set up an appointment to talk with her, because it's a lot, there are people who are gifted in kind of helping us see who we are. So that's perfect. And thank you so much for coming on. And guys, thank you for listening. I will be back next week with 2 more interviews. They're going to be really interesting. I'm excited to tell you guys about that. But just look at our Facebook page, Health.Beauty.Hope, and our group for more information. I want to kind of surprise you guys with the next people who are going to be on next week. So tune in. Thank you guys. Subscribe, like, and definitely check out our blog also. And have a good night. Thank you guys.